It's your Catholic Drive Time
with Joe McClane and EmilyiAlcaraz.
Joining the program right now via Zoom is Duncan Stroik. He is a practicing architect, author, and professor of architecture at the University of Notre Dame. He's also an award-winning architect with many projects to his credit, to include Our Lady of the Most Holy Trinity Chapel in California. But one of my favorites, and maybe you haven't received an award for this, but I'd like to give you one, is Our Lady of Guadalupe Shrine in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Truly beautiful and exquisite. Well done, good sir. Duncan Stroik, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Joe. Thank you for having me.
We invited you on because we wanted to have a conversation about the purpose of architecture. Now, I know that you also participated in an effort to look at government buildings, federal buildings, and whether or not we should have architecture in federal buildings that would inspire. But I think this is at the heart of the conversation, especially in regards to church buildings. What is the purpose of architecture? We've seen so many buildings in the church that don't inspire, and you just kind of wonder, like, what was the purpose and plan here? Is there sort of a theology of architecture that we've been missing over the past few decades? Duncan Stroik.
Well, the short answer is yes. We've been missing it because we've been enthralled by the emperor's new clothes, which we call modernist architecture, which is the latest thing, or it's the latest thing. And so we've also thrown out we've put on dark sunglasses so we can't see very well. And we've checked our experiences or our feelings at the door. And of course, our theology had to be redone a la the Spirit of Vatican II.
So how do we look at architecture? Is it just simply a case where we just have to wind back the clock and look back to past years? Or how do you approach architecture, especially when it comes to church architecture, when you're building a new building or even reinventing or revigorating an older building? How do you begin to have this conversation? Is it subjective, or are there principles? I mean, how do we do this?
That's a great question. Yes, I think there are principles of sacred architecture, as well as you could say, the desire of the client, as well as the talent of the architect. But the five principles I like to emphasize are transcendence, verticality, directionality, which emphasizes the nave or the focus, the procession that we're going towards, geometry, which should be all about architecture, shouldn't be a random design, but there are clear emphases in geometry, centers and edges, and then Catholic architecture and civic architecture that we've been talking about should be durable. It should be something that lasts. Should be well built, which means it's expensive, but also should be well built out of natural and good materials, rather than just the latest thing. And then finally, and this I think does apply to both federal American architecture as well as sacred architecture, is it needs iconography. It needs to speak to people through images, through statues, through paintings, through inscriptions, and even little symbols that enrich our lives, that reflect us, but also reflect the great world that we're part of.
Dr. Stroik, I was wondering, because I know you were working with the commission under President Trump, and I know he made an executive order in regards to classical architecture. Could you speak about what it was that the executive order did, and how hard would it be for Biden to overturn that executive order?
Well, that's a good question. I myself was not directly involved in the executive order, although I support it. The executive order by President Trump was that federal buildings in Washington, D.C., so it's just the buildings owned by the U.S. government, paid for by the American citizens, that all new federal buildings in DC and around the country, in all of our 50 states, would reflect the classical tradition. And that's a broad tradition. That's basically 2,000 years of architecture, 2,500 years of architecture. And there's lots of ways to do it. And it's in saying that, it's learning from our great history in the U.S. of civic buildings, whether it be the White House or the U.S. Capitol, or whether it be more recent office buildings in the Federal Triangle, and then scads and scads of wonderful federal courthouses in major cities across the land that were done in a classical tradition up through World War II. And then I should point out that there's flexibility and freedom, and if the local officials deem that we're doing something in the Southwest, so we're going to do something more that fits in with Spanish tradition, or we're going to do something in Florida, or other parts of the country where we have local stone or local traditions, that can certainly be embraced. So it's a very flexible, looking at thousands of years of architecture, looking at our specific tradition, and then doing things that would be beautiful, durable, and also functional.
We're talking with Duncan Stroik. He is a professor at Notre Dame and a practicing architect. We're talking about architecture, the purpose, the plan, the theology behind it. I know we're going to go to break here in just a moment, and we'll come back and continue our conversation, but I want to know about scale. I remember I had an opportunity to go to St. Peter's Basilica in Rome in 2005. And the first thing I wanted to do when we hit our hotel was to get into St. Peter's Square and just behold this basilica with my own eyes. And the scale of it was so massive, so impressive. When you walk in, the holy water font is, 3.5 feet wide. It's massive. The letters are 10 feet tall that wrap, the ceiling. It's just, everything is so massive, so beautiful, but you can't help but lift your eyes and go, and your whole spirit sort of goes up and looks up, and you behold the grandeur of it all. And I want to say there's something to that's been lost. And I want to touch on that. We'll have to do that on the other side of the break, where our conversation with Duncan Stroik. Duncan Stroik is our guest. Architecture, I'm sort of dubbing it the theology of architecture, sort of the heart of our conversation today. Welcome back to the program, Dr. Stroik. It's so good to have you on today. Thank you for your time. I started, before we went to break, I shared my little experience about going to Rome and the grand scale. I mean, even the staircase in the museum there is just awe-inspiring and incredible. I feel like we've lost that. There's so many church buildings that just, as I said at the beginning of our conversation, are not inspiring. Is there something to scale that we should reincorporate in church architecture, Duncan Stroik?
Okay, excellent point, Joe. Scale or size or in relation to the human body is crucial. And when we think of civic buildings, when we think of sacred buildings, for a lot of people particularly, the scale should be monumental. It should be grand. Now, that grandeur does express us and the people of God, or the people being invited to be in. This is public. This is for everyone. It's a big doorway. And so we welcome people. It's not a commercial building. It's not just a private house, but it's open to everyone. So that scale is for everyone, as it were. Speak to the city, the world. But if we're also doing a building for the church or a sacred building, then it also represents something. As you said, it represents something bigger than us: eternity, the Trinity, hope, faith, love. Those are big concepts. How do you embody those in architecture? Well, they're large. They're also intimate. They're also personal, but they're large and they're generous. So ultimately, the building represents the people of God, but also represents God. How do you represent that? King David felt bad that he built this amazing palace, and the Ark of the Covenant was still in a tent. And he said, I want to build something worthy of you. And so his son was able to build the temple. It's that kind of sensibility that God deserves our best. And the best also means fine materials. It also means grandeur and monumentality. It's not selfish. but it does represent all of us, and it represents God. So it needs to be noble, and it needs to ennoble us.
That's great. Mr. Stroik, I actually go to St. Teresa's, so I just want to thank you personally for the work that you've done on St. Teresa's, because the way that I pray there is completely different from the past parish, which was completely scrubbed, bare, so minimalistic. And in a sense, I think that the exterior surrounding in which you pray affects your interior, because even when you get distracted in prayer, you can look up and see the beauty, and that brings you back to God. So can you talk a little bit about beauty and how it affects our souls?
Yeah, you make a good point, Emily, that buildings or church buildings, like all of the other things that are part of Catholicism, should assist us, should support us. And I remember one of my priest friends early in my career pointed out that he had a Catholic school and he brought the kids to church. He said, my church can teach them more about the faith than words for little children, because they can see the Stations of the Cross. They can see that little temple, which has the Blessed Sacrament in it. Mm-hmm. They can see an image of Christ crucified or of the saints. And so it's to assist us. Obviously, God is bigger than us. It's bigger than buildings. But how can our buildings help us to worship the way that music or prayers or what have you? And yes, I agree. Beauty is the crucial point. When I was a kid in architecture school 35 years ago, we did not use the B word. Beauty was not used. It was not, you didn't talk about it. You talked about other things. And that reflected our architecture. We were not, as architects, trying to make beautiful things. And so if we try as architects to make beautiful things, we will come up against, is this building as beautiful as that one? Is this as beautiful as, say, the St. Peter's in Rome, or Chartres Cathedral, or the statuary? And it drives us, just like an athlete, it drives you to do a better job when you're looking at great stuff and trying to do something of that level. And usually we fall short, but some of the greatest artists and architects don't fall short, and we're trying to attain to that. But beauty is crucial to architecture, but especially to sacred architecture.
Duncan Stroik is our guest. He is an architect and a professor at Notre Dame, and we're having this conversation about I'm calling it the theology of architecture. So you mentioned when you were in architecture school, what about today's students? Are they having a conversation about beauty? How are they looking at their future careers and the next generation of not only federal buildings or civic buildings, but church buildings in particular?
So this is really interesting, Joe. The National Civic Architecture Society, which is based in D.C. but looks at architecture across the country, and has been one of the groups that has encouraged the executive order, as well as they've been involved in various recent monuments, like the debate and argument over the Eisenhower Memorial. They did an amazing study in October with the Harris Poll Company, who looked at 5 pairs of buildings, a modernist building and a classical building, that were federal buildings, usually courthouses, and they compared them, and then they went to 2,000 adults around the country and asked them what they liked. And what they found was that, and some buildings more than others, but Americans have a preference for classical buildings over modernist buildings, meaning the last 50, 60 years, about 70% to 30. 70% of Americans really do prefer tradition. They do prefer classicism for their buildings that embody, our country or citizenship or what have you. And I think that's true across the board, that if you give people a choice, they'll pick the classical building, the Gothic building, the traditional building. And that's very exciting that the normal people, the average person, the educated person, the conservative and the liberal prefer traditional classical buildings. Now, one of the purposes of architecture school is to take those people and change their views. And architecture schools do a good job taking normal kids who like the county courthouse or their Tudor residence or things in Rome or in Spain, and getting them to think about the spirit of our age or being relevant or other ideas that will get them away from looking at the past and doing something more innovative and less attractive.
That's not inspiring, Duncan Stroik. That's kind of concerning. We want the next generation to be awe-inspiring by beauty, by natural law and beauty. We're going to run out of time here, and we're going to have to wrap up here in just a few minutes. But one of the points I was just thinking about was I used to attend a church in downtown Houston. Very beautiful, one of the oldest churches in the diocese, very ornate, very beautiful, very traditional too. And we saw a phenomenon while we were parishioners there, that people from all over the diocese would come to that church to get married. And I always wonder, why would you do that? I mean, you're a parishioner at such and such church, and this church, and that church. Why do you flock to this particular place to just get married and not be a part of that community or what have you? It just seems strange to me. And then as you're talking, the thought occurred to me I think each and every one of us, built into our heart, as St. Paul would say in Romans 1, we know inherently what is beautiful and what is less beautiful. But if that's true, then what can we do about our churches, our parishes that maybe are less inspiring or less beautiful? Is it possible to do something about them without having to just, level it to the ground and rebuild from scratch? I mean, that's the perpetual capital campaign is a state of life in the Catholic Church. How do we overcome these things and still get the beauty that our hearts desire most? Duncan Stroik.
Oh, that's great. Yes. Bill McGurn at the Wall Street Journal wrote years ago that if you want to know the true test of a church, ask the bride. And the brides know what's beautiful. They're going to get married. They're going to get married once. And so it's got to be really, really good. Mm-hmm. And but we'll put up with other things for our normal Sunday. Yes, can we make all of our churches worthy of weddings, worthy of a bride's chapel? And I think we can, all in our own way. I know people that have donated small amounts of money to beautify. They ask, Father, could I give this for some candles for the altar? Can I give this for to clean something? Can I give money to paint something? So there's ways to do, like you said, the campaign to do something grand, which is wonderful. But also we can just show appreciation the way that we do for our houses. And if the church is the house of God and the house of the people, it's your house too. And so you can take care of it. You can offer, you can add, you can take care of it and beautify it. And that's what we should do in each of us in our own way.
We have a couple minutes left in our conversation with Duncan Stroik. Besides, Our Lady of Guadalupe, that shrine in La Crosse is truly epic and beautiful. The hike up to it is just so grand with being in it's nestled in the mountains in the valley there. It's just great. But we have about a minute and a half left. What's your favorite project of all the ones you've worked on?
So my favorite project is the next one.
You can't choose from all your children, can you?
Yeah, we've been so honored. You know what's fun about being an architect is I get to work all over the country, from California to Connecticut and from Texas to Minnesota. And all of the projects are wonderful, but they're all unique. And I love working with the pastors and the bishops. I love serving the local people and their music, and as well as bringing in top artists and craftsmen to bless their church or to beautify their building.
All right.
And so right now we're actually back at Our Lady of Guadalupe doing a project there.
Wonderful.
Which is very exciting. And you'll find out more about that in months to come.
All right,
and,
we're going to have to leave it there.
Finished a cathedral in Michigan.
I hate to cut you off, but we're out of time. Duncan Stroik, God bless you. Thank you for being on the program today. We're very grateful for your time. We're going to post a link to stroik.com on facebook.com/Catholic Drive Time. You can find that there. But God love you. God bless you, Duncan Stroik. Thanks for being on the show today. That's going to do it for Catholic Drive Time. Check us out in the next hour. We're going to have the trivia game show, and prizes are involved. Join us online.
Thank you for joining us on Your Catholic Drive Time, where it is our pleasure to keep you informed and inspired.
Join us Monday through Friday at the same time, right here on your favorite Catholic radio station.
Don't forget to connect with us. Just go to facebook.com/Catholic Drive Time.
Again, that's facebook.com/Catholic Drive Time.
Be sure to share more than just us today. Share Jesus with everyone you meet.
Bye now, and God love you.